Hello. We continue the conversation with Anatoly Fomenko about Cape Fiolent in Crimea. The Nativity of Christ Hall in the Multimedia Museum of the New Chronology in Yaroslavl is dedicated to this topic. In this hall, it is detailed why the Crimean Peninsula is the true birthplace of Christ. Where the Cave of the Nativity is actually located. In what year this historical event took place. And who was the first to come to worship the Virgin Mary and the newborn Andronikos-Christ. Anatoly Timofeyevich, hello.
Hello, Svetlana. I'm very pleased to see you in another podcast for our New Chronology Museum.
Anatoly Timofeyevich, please tell us, if any facts from the biography of Andronikos-Christ have been preserved in Crimean legends. For instance, what do the legends say about Andrew the Apostle?
It is believed that Andrew the Apostle first set foot on the Russian land in Crimea, specifically at Cape Fiolent. He was not very pleased with the local people, so he decided to bring them the light of Christ's faith. As we understand now, the first baptisms took place here in the 12th century in the land surrounding Cape Fiolent, that is, in Crimea. In Crimea, in the cave temples of Inkerman, there was a cave church dedicated to Andrew the Apostle. It was also carved into the rock, and according to tradition, considered very ancient, and as we understand, for good reason. In Crimea, the memory was preserved that the Nativity took place in a cave at Cape Fiolent. One of the capes in southern Crimea was also named after Andrew the Apostle. Moving on. Another story is connected with southern Crimea and Fiolent. It involves the well-known Constantinople preacher Saint Basil of Chersonesus. This is another reflection of the birth of Andronikos-Christ in Crimea. Again, this preacher and his story are directly linked to Cape Fiolent. He arrived in Crimea at Cape Fiolent and, as we are told today, hid in the cave of this cape, in the Parthenon cave. As we understand it, the name Basil is simply the word basileus, which means king, or czar. Therefore, the king Basileus, according to this version of the legend, hid in the cave at Cape Fiolent. Once again, this is a subtle reflection of the birth of Christ in a cave at Fiolent. Next in this narrative comes his story. The story of Saint Basil is almost identical to the story of Jesus Christ. By the way, this was pointed out by Nikolai Morozov in his research. When we studied this material, his research was fully confirmed. Saint Basil was also subjected to martyrdom. It is believed that he was torn apart and killed. Again, the story of his execution closely resembles the Gospel narrative and the account by Nikitas Koniates about the crucifixion of Andronikos-Christ. Thus, it is considered that this famous preacher lived in the 4th century. According to legends, he began to introduce Christianity to Crimea. Everything is clear. This is a reflection of the story of Andronikos-Christ. Later, a rebellion arose against him. He was seized and executed by crucifixion. I won't go into more detail about this. This is another new duplicate of the story of Andronikos-Christ. Another plot that brings us back to Cape Fiolent is the massacre of the innocents in Bethlehem by King Herod in Crimea. We have already understood that Bethlehem, in Russian Viflem, is a slightly distorted name for Fiolent. Therefore, in Crimean legends, this bright event should somehow be reflected: the massacre of the innocents by the evil King Herod in Bethlehem Fiolent. And indeed, our prediction is justified. There is a Crimean legend according to which a flying dragon appeared at Fiolent, speaking the language of humans. This terrible dragon began to violate women. They gave birth to children, and he killed the women. I won't delve into the details now, but in this form, the massacre of the innocents by King Herod is vividly reflected in the legends of Crimea. Women gave birth to infants, and a malicious dragon killed them. All of this took place in Crimea.
Anatoly Timofeyevich, please tell us about the famous city of Delphi, which is considered to be ancient Greek but, according to the new chronology, Delphi is Crimean Fiolent.
What is known about Delphi? This sanctuary is famous in ancient history. In ancient literature and in legends, Delphi is considered the center of the universe. Here, the sun god, also known as Apollo, receives his oracles in the Delphic temple. This temple is situated at the center of the world. From here, Zeus or Jupiter looks in all directions of the earth. From here, he rules, and from here, he gives predictions. This is Delphi. Delphi became a pan-Hellenic sanctuary. Let's return to this depiction once again. The god Apollo sits on a stone called the omphalos. We have already understood that omphalos, omphalion, Fiolent, stone, all refer to Cape Fiolent, where the stone of the Holy Apparition or the rock of the Holy Apparition was located in the cave temple of the Nativity of Christ. So, this omphalos stone was indeed in Delphi, in those very Delphi where people, kings, pilgrims gathered to learn about their future, receive guidance, predictions, and set out to fulfill them. In Delphi, numerous offerings were brought. They were under the protection of the Delphic region. There were special services that guarded this temple. By the way, in the word Delphi, when read in reverse, again, the name Fiolent resonates. D and T used to interchange with each other. Therefore, Delphi and Fiolent are only different in the direction of reading the name of the same place. What do they show us today as the famous ancient Delphi? In the territory of Greece, they show us a certain amphitheater. Here it is. The one that, purely theoretically on paper, they designated as the ancient Delphi. A vast number of similar ruins can be pointed out not only in Greece but also in Turkey, Italy, France, practically anywhere. There are numerous amphitheaters of various sizes. This amphitheater doesn't stand out among others. Moreover, According to legends, it is believed that in Delphi, there should have been the navel of the world. That is, as we understand, the Omphalion is the navel of Jesus, the navel of Zeus. Zeus lost his umbilical cord on the Omphalion, on the Omphalos stone, that is, at Cape Fiolent. What have modern historians done? Here is a photo of the place today called ancient Delphi. They made a concrete pebble, called it Omphalos, Omphalion, and placed it in Delphi for the worship of visitors, tourists. Supposedly, this is the sacred Omphalos on which the god Apollo solemnly sat. This is a blatant modern replica. Actually, it is not hidden. The fact that it is made of concrete is evident to all visitors. In the museum, they show another stone, also called Omphalos, Omphalion. And, in general, the idea of the navel of the world has proliferated. In the previous picture, we saw a concrete modern replica in fictitious Delphi in Greece. This is another duplicate in the museum. This is an ancient depiction of Apollo. Apollo solemnly sits on a stone. The Omphalos stone, Omphalion, Fiolent, on which the god Apollo's son sits, who is also Jesus and Zeus, is shown here. In Jerusalem, they also show the navel of the world made in our time. This is also some kind of modern replica. Therefore, the very concept of the navel of the world has multiplied. It is demonstrated in various places, naturally, for tourists. Here is another image. As we have already mentioned, the primary Omphalos, the navel of the world, was located at Cape Fiolent in Crimea. There was also a rock of the Holy Apparition. Here, Zeus lost his umbilical cord. Here is the cave temple of the Nativity of Christ. I want to show Cape Fiolent again. This is a modern picture. In the distance there is a grotto. Here is this rock, and inside the grotto. It starts here, goes right through the rock, and comes out on the other side. According to Crimean legends, the grotto of Diana, the Virgin, was located here. Supposedly, there was a sanctuary. Human sacrifices were made here. But today, nothing remains. At least, we are not aware of any excavations. Maybe there is something there, but today we have no information about the sanctuary of the Diana's grotto. The grotto itself remains. Here it is visible. You can visit it when you come to Cape Fiolent. Next, another plot in addition to the story of the Oracle of Delphi, the history of Delphi. According to ancient tradition, according to ancient sources, it turns out the sanctuary in Delphi was founded by the Hyperboreans who came from the north. The mother of Apollo-Christ was from the land of the Hyperboreans, and Apollo himself spent the entire winter here. Here is one of the ancient depictions of the northern winds, the Boreas wind. Once again, we see that in this legend there is authentic information that the sanctuary at Fiolent, in Delphi, was founded by people who came from the north, the Hyperboreans. Here, Apollo spent the entire winter. I want to remind you that in the Chronicles of Nikitas Koniates, and we talked about this a lot, it is mentioned that Andronikos-Christ spent a lot of time specifically in Crimea, in Taurica. As we understand, this is not a coincidence either. Another question that arises is why the predictions and prophecies of the Oracle of Delphi were unquestionably fulfilled. Why were they considered the voice of the God? It is clear why. Christ was born here, and the first priestess of Delphi was a virgin. As we understand it, this is a memory of the Virgin Mary. All the subsequent priestesses of the sanctuary in Delphi were also virgins. Therefore, the predictions of the oracle, that is, Delphi, Fiolent, were predictions and prophecies not of just anyone, but of the God Jesus Christ himself. It is understandable that in an empire where Christianity prevailed, his words, predictions, and prophecies emanating from the sacred center, from Cape Fiolent, were considered obligatory to fulfill. This is believed to continue throughout the entire antiquity.
Anatoly Timofeyevich, information has been preserved that Russian emperors repeatedly came to worship at Cape Fiolent. But did they visit Palestine?
I want to say that Russian czars did not visit modern Palestine to worship supposedly holy places associated with Jesus Christ. Apparently, Russian czars understood well that these were modern replicas of the 18th–19th centuries and did not consider it appropriate to deign to visit these modern creations in Palestine. However, they did visit Fiolent, and not just once. What is known? Of course, the czars did visit. Alexander I visited Fiolent several times. Nicholas I, with the Empress and the heir, Grand Duke Alexander Nikolaevich, and the Grand Duchess, visited Fiolent. Representatives of ruling families from Western Europe also visited. There were many foreigners here. Nicholas II also visited Fiolent several times, the last time in 1915. Alexander Pushkin visited Fiolent, as did many other writers. Naturally, it was a place for the worship of believers. Many believers in the 19th century visited the cave temple of the Nativity of Christ. In other countries, there is no such temple. Only in Crimea, at Fiolent, there is an old temple whose foundation is linked to the Nativity of Christ in the 1st century. This is Crimea, Cape Fiolent. Alexander Griboyedov visited Fiolent and its monastery. By the way, Nikita Khrushchev, along with leaders of socialist countries, visited Fiolent in 1960. So, the memory that Cape Fiolent is a sacred place was preserved for a very long time. In conclusion, I want to show you several modern photos of Cape Fiolent. Here are our photos as well. We have been there several times, repeatedly visited the Temple of the Nativity of Christ, visited the Grotto of Diana, and the St. George Monastery. Here are some photos taken by various people who come here, remembering that this place was considered sacred, and many came here to worship these places. Here is Cape Fiolent. Here are its various views. This is the rock where the Grotto of Diana is located. An evening view of Cape Fiolent and the Grotto of Diana. This is also a view of the Grotto of Diana. High tide. Here is a very high cliff. The cave and the temple are located on a huge cliff. Usually, there are few people here. Again, a panorama of Cape Fiolent. On the left is the Temple of the Nativity of Christ. This is a monument in honor of Pushkin's visit to Cape Fiolent. We talked about this. View of the Black Sea. View of the Grotto of Diana, the rock of Cape Fiolent. Another photo. Another one. A very romantic, beautiful place. The Rock of the Holy Apparition. A photo from below, right from the beach, where the pebbles are. Again, a view of Cape Fiolent. The Rock of the Holy Apparition. This is the famous painting by Ivan Ivazovsky. He treated Cape Fiolent with great respect and painted a remarkable picture, the Monastery of St. George, Cape Fiolent. Another painting. This is a painting by Vasily Vereshchagin. Our famous artist also dedicated his painting to Cape Fiolent. In the distance, the Grotto of Diana, Cape Fiolent. Conclusion. Cape Fiolent is the birthplace of Christ. According to our reconstruction, Mount Baikos is the place of his crucifixion. Chufut Calais is the place of the death and burial of the Virgin Mary. Let's note the following common detail. For centuries, there was much in common in people's attitudes toward these three places. In the 12th–13th centuries, all three places, Fiolent, Baikos, Chufut Calais, enjoyed immense reverence. Numerous pilgrims arrived here. It was the time of royal Christianity. That is, Christ was worshipped, also calling him Zeus, Dionysus, Apollo, and so on. The Virgin Mary was also referred to by various ancient names. In Jerusalem Tsargrad, on Baikos Golgotha, and in Crimea, ancient temple sanctuaries dedicated to Andronikos-Christ were erected. Sacrifices, including human sacrifices, apparently took place here. It was the era of royal Christianity. But then, with a change in chronology, with a change in the version of history, in the era of the Reformation, this information was suppressed, oppressed, silenced. These sacred places were plunged into oblivion. And in their place, as we discussed, fake modern replicas were built. Fake Jerusalem, fake birthplace of Jesus Christ, fake tomb of the Virgin Mary, and so on. All of this happened in the 18th–20th centuries.
Anatoly Timofeyevich, thank you very much.
Thank you, Svetlana, for this podcast, and thanks to all the listeners who visited us today. All the best to everyone. Goodbye.
In our next program, we will continue the conversation with the founders of the New Chronology about the results of their scientific research. We look forward to seeing you on our channel and at the Multimedia Museum of the New Chronology in Yaroslavl. See you soon.